South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is facing a possible impeachment threat over allegations that he covered up a $4 million theft in his farm in 2020, including kidnapping and bribing the burglars into silence. A 3-volume report from an independent panel set up to investigate the allegations has found that he abused his position and may have broken an anti-corruption law. The South African leader has denied any wrongdoing and said the money was from proceeds of selling buffaloes. The panel's findings have been handed over to Parliament, which is set to examine them and decide whether or not to launch impeachment proceedings next week. Meanwhile, the South African Parliament says that President Ramaphosa will no longer answer questions from lawmakers this Thursday because he wants a postponement to consider the contents of the inquiry about his conduct. Well, we are
dragging the president before an impeachment process is a huge decision. It cannot be done on flimsy grounds. There has to be something tangible that you can hold on to before you take that decision.
When we announced that today we'll be receiving this report from the panel, independent panel, we then also announced that on the 6th, by the way, even there was consultation with all political parties, and it was agreed to that on the 6th, which is next week, Tuesday, this report will be tabled before the Assembly.
Then after having received the report as political parties, I will go through the report as the Office of the Chief Whip and call caucus to brief caucus what is the content of the report. At the moment, we'll be shooting from the dark because we don't know what the report is all about, but we are going to take the process forward up until the 6th.
We're now being joined by African Affairs analyst Farai Muvuti to discuss Ramaphosa's travails, the political undertone to it, and how this could impact his bid to remain ANC leader. Good to have you on Newsday. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Farai, let's start with a 3-volume report from the independent panel. What more can you tell us about it?
Well, the report seems to clearly look at the circumstances that arise around the Pala gate, if you want to call it that, the case around the cash that was hidden at the president's farm. It seems to assert that he is in breach of a number of constitutional lines, in particular Section 96(2) and Section 92(a). And it concludes that he may have broken the law and may have broken the Presidential Code of Ethics. And as a consequence, this then may begin to stop a process, be it of impeachment, or depending on what the outcomes are, based on Parliament's decision, as per their reading of the report. But what the conclusion is that he certainly is in breach of the Constitution of South Africa.
And we know that he will be speaking later on today. We anticipate his speech. And we also know that the ANC is very well known for its step-aside rule. He himself has been very vocal about members of his own party who have been seen to be on the other side of the corruption laws. Do you foresee a situation where he would step aside and actually abide by these laws in his own party?
Well, it depends. The step-aside conditions in his particular party's resolutions, as far as the party's constitution is concerned, speak to being charged first. In this instance, he is not charged. It's an inquiry based on parliamentary proceedings. So his defense could be, well, we would like to take the outcomes of that particular inquiry under review, under legal review, perhaps basing it on the fact that the Inquisition itself, its framework was quite limited. They could not interview witnesses. They literally had to, look at testimonies and a lot of circumstantial evidence. But the report itself seems to pin its findings based on his responses. So they could be that. Or the most dignified way would be for him to resign. If he doesn't go that way, it'll be now left to the NEC, which is the highest decision-making body. And depending on the ANC outcome, the NEC outcomes, which is happening tonight, where there is already sufficient internal divides, he could be pressured to either step down or face impeachment by virtue of his party. But in that, it's quite tricky because last week the party had just gone through its nominations process, and the tallying seemed to put him with very rather evident quite high support within the branches of the ANC. So he may have confidence in those numbers. And as the Southern African Times, we had an opportunity to interact with his team at a very high senior level last week during their visit to London. And what I found was they have a lot of confidence in the president's support. So you might leverage that support. But I think what would be necessary is a resignation. So we might find that between now and then, which is this evening, and his press statement or his speech, which we're anticipating, we might see a president whether willing to resign. But all this is speculation.
So, Farai, any reactions from former President Jacob Zuma over this Farmgate scandal? I'm sure you recall he was forced out of office over accusations of corruption that was later affirmed by a judicial inquiry. Any reactions whatsoever from him?
We have not seen a direct reaction from Zuma's camp. They have their own battles to be fighting at the moment, considering his legal challenges. But what we have seen is a lot of his supporters actually rather saying that, well, this is what we've been saying all along. If you recall, Zuma came out last week together with 2 weeks ago, rather, together with former President Beki, alleging that the president should step aside in light of the allegations that have been made. And so that particular positioning and or line of thought seems to be prevalent. In fact, if anything, they feel vindicated.
Interesting. And Farai, still speaking on those supporters, do the results of this three-man panel investigation, which is supposed to reveal itself next week, Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, does it make anyone in the country nervous, especially with the stability of the country, seeing as when Jacob Zuma was going through his own situation and his results were announced, there was a bit of violence in the country. Do you anticipate any such from Ramaphosa supporters from now till Tuesday?
Well, I think what we've seen, the markets have somewhat responded in the sense that there was a 1% dip in the rand this morning. It slightly rose later on. But Ramaphosa is someone who the business community seems to have confidence in, the markets seem to have confidence in. And remember, this is happening at the heels of right at the backdrop of him having traveled to the UK and at a state banquet in which a number of investment promises had been made. That particular potential of instability is one that leaves South Africa quite vulnerable. So his decisions at a presidential level, governmental level, as well as a party level, will be quite telling. In terms of the reactions of the population, it's yet to be seen. The ANC doesn't seem to have a massive response in the sense of the ethical issues that have been raised. It's still incumbent upon the meetings that they have this evening. Now, how this is handled will determine if indeed it will lead to some sort of a Zuma outcome. But I think it's apples and oranges because Zuma's backdrop is a KwaZulu-Natal constituency, which historically has had some of these challenges. We may not see that with Ramaphosa.
Well, it's also claimed that of the $580,000 that was set to be for the payment for the sale of buffaloes, which is this whole what this whole case is premised on, that it was stashed inside of sofa couches on the farm. And reports are also saying that those people who were supposed to receive the buffaloes still have not received them up to 2 years later. Any reports on whether or not that was what sparked the investigation in the first place?
Well, what sparked the investigation in the first place was a report made by an intelligence officer named Arthur Fraser, who worked as a DG in the government at the time. And that report, because he was associated with Ramaphosa, it was somewhat looked at with skepticism. However, over time, when the investigation had occurred, these findings have been made. And part of that particular finding was during the investigative process of it, you find that the panel learned that, well, it's asserted that the buffaloes in themselves had not been taken. So it became a suspicious issue about the sources of the funding. So it's not quite clear till today where that money came from. And I think that's where the issue lies.
African Affairs analyst Farai Muvuti, thank you so much for joining us.